"Cactus, do what you want, cowboy," said the Apache woman tied to the rancher's fence. But then, the afternoon sun was fierce and unrelenting. The wide Texas sky stretched endlessly above, a pale blue that seemed to burn in the heat. The air was dry and heavy, carrying the smell of dust and sun-baked earth. The ranch was quiet, except for the occasional caw of a crow and the distant lowing of cattle grazing near the far fence line. The cowboy rode slowly along the dirt path, checking the fences that ran like veins across the vast land. His horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust as he moved, and he shaded his eyes with one hand, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Life on a ranch was usually predictable, and he liked it that way, but today felt different, though he couldn't put his finger on why. As he neared a corner of the ranch where an old wooden fence leaned dangerously, he noticed something unusual. At first, he thought it might be a stray piece of rope or a pile of old boards, but as he got closer, his heart skipped a beat. There, tied to the fence, was a woman. She was strong-looking, with sharp, determined features and eyes that were alive with defiance even in her situation. The sun hit her hair, turning it to a rich dark brown that shimmered in the harsh light. She was tied firmly but not cruelly, and she looked at him with a mixture of challenge and caution. For a moment, the cowboy froze. He had heard of trouble in the area before, disputes between neighbors, the occasional run-in with thieves, but nothing like this. He studied her carefully, trying to figure out what had happened. She didn't seem hurt, though she was clearly uncomfortable. She shifted slightly, testing the knots, and her eyes met his with a spark of fire that made him uneasy and curious at the same time. "Do what you want, cowboy," she said, her voice steady, almost teasing, though there was a hint of tension beneath it. She held herself tall, refusing to show fear even though the situation was clearly precarious. The words hung in the air, and the cowboy felt the weight of them. He didn't know if she was daring him, warning him, or testing him. All he knew was that he couldn't ignore her. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dry dirt, and moved closer. "Easy now," he said softly, keeping his hands visible. "I don't mean no harm." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, studying his movements. She was cautious, as she should be, and the cowboy respected that. He had learned long ago that people who could hold their ground in a tough situation often had more strength than those who seemed free and easy. As he reached her, he noticed the skill in how she had tied herself, or perhaps how she had been tied. The knots were firm but not overly complicated, and they seemed designed to restrain without hurting. She wasn't helpless, and he realized she could probably free herself if she chose to, but there was a reason she didn't. He sensed pride, intelligence, and a quiet strength in her, all wrapped up in the defiance of someone who refused to be simply rescued or pitied. "Who did this to you?" he asked, glancing around. There was no one else in sight, and the ranch seemed as empty as ever. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her tone deliberate. "It doesn't matter. You weren't supposed to see this, but since you did," she trailed off, leaving him to interpret the rest. He wasn't sure whether she meant danger, warning, or an invitation for help. He knew better than to assume. Carefully, he reached for the ropes. She didn't flinch, though her eyes followed his every move. The cowboy worked slowly, loosening the knots just enough to give her some freedom without alarming her. She flexed her hands as the ropes loosened, testing them with patience and control. There was no panic, only quiet calculation. He admired her calm, and for the first time he felt a sense of partnership forming between them, even in this strange and tense situation. As the last rope slipped free, she stood up straight, brushing dust from her clothes. "Well," she said lightly, almost teasing, "that wasn't so hard, was it?" The cowboy smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Not hard, just unexpected," he replied. The woman laughed softly, a sound that was both musical and strong. It was the kind of laugh that carried confidence, the kind that told you she had faced worse than this and come out stronger. She began to explain slowly, her words careful and measured. She was an Apache woman, she said, and she had been trying to deal with a local rancher over a matter of fairness. Some livestock had gone missing, and she had tried to negotiate peaceably. But the rancher had refused to listen, and in frustration or malice, he had tied her there. She didn't ask for sympathy, only recognition of her situation. Her voice carried pride, not complaint, and the cowboy realized she wasn't someone who needed saving. She needed someone to see the truth and respect it. The cowboy nodded as he listened, sensing the weight of her words. He had grown up around ranches, learned the ways of the land, and understood the rough justice of it all. But he also knew the importance of fairness and respect, and he could see that she had been wronged. He felt a surge of determination, not to control her, but to help her reclaim her freedom in a way that maintained her dignity. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll figure this out. You can't stay here, that's for sure." She met his eyes, assessing him carefully. Then she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible sign of trust. It wasn't given freely, and it wasn't complete, but it was enough for now. They moved together, side by side, across the uneven ground, navigating the dry brush and scattered rocks. She walked with confidence, and he stayed alert, scanning the area for any signs of the rancher or anyone else who might cause trouble. As they moved, she shared fragments of her story, her life, her family, and the challenges she faced as an Apache woman in a world that often misunderstood her. She spoke of traditions, of pride in her heritage, and of the quiet strength required to survive in a harsh environment. The cowboy listened, intrigued and respectful. He realized that this encounter was more than just a moment of rescue. It was a chance to understand someone who lived by principles he could admire but had never truly experienced. They paused for a moment in the shade of a lone mesquite tree. The woman looked at him, her eyes steady and unwavering. "You could leave," she said softly. "You don't have to stay." There was no accusation in her tone, only honesty. He shook his head. "I'm not leaving you here." "That's not right." She studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, approving nod. It wasn't trust fully given, but it was acknowledgement that she could rely on him, for now. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the desert in golden light. Shadows stretched long and thin across the land. The cowboy and the Apache woman continued moving, aware of the time and the need to reach a safe place before nightfall. She led the way with quiet assurance, and he followed, learning from her confidence and careful steps. They navigated the fence lines, the dry creek beds, and the uneven terrain with a sense of purpose, forming an unspoken alliance. Along the way, the cowboy noticed her keen awareness of her surroundings. She could read the land, sense danger, and anticipate obstacles in a way he had never seen before. Her skills were impressive, and he realized that she had survived not just by courage, but by intelligence and intuition. He found himself both cautious and impressed, aware that this partnership was different from any he had known before. By the time they reached a safer area of the ranch, the sun was touching the horizon. The sky had turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the desert. They paused, both catching their breath and taking in the beauty of the moment. The tension of the afternoon had eased slightly, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. They had faced the unknown together and emerged intact, each recognizing the strength in the other. The cowboy looked at her and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. She returned the gesture with a small smile, her defiance softened by relief. They both knew that the day was not yet over, and that challenges would continue to come. But for now, they had found a moment of understanding, a fragile trust that could grow if nurtured. As they settled into the shade, the cowboy offered her some water from his canteen. She accepted it gracefully, and they drank in silence for a few moments, sharing the simple comfort of survival in a harsh world. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant cattle, and the first stars began to appear in the sky. It was a quiet, powerful moment, two people from different worlds brought together by circumstance, learning to respect and rely on each other. And in that moment, the cowboy understood something important. This encounter was not just about helping someone in need. It was about recognizing courage, respecting strength, and forging a bond that neither of them had anticipated. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that today had changed both of them in ways they would carry forward. The desert air grew cooler as the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the rolling hills and sparse trees of the ranch. The cowboy and the Apache woman moved carefully, each step deliberate, their senses alert to every sound, every movement. Though the immediate danger of being tied to the fence was gone, the threat of the rancher, or anyone who might cause trouble, still hung over them like a dark cloud. They knew that getting safely back to a more secure part of the property would take patience, trust, and careful planning. The woman walked with quiet confidence, her boots moving lightly over the rough ground. She had a way of reading the land that fascinated the cowboy. Every rock, every thorn, every uneven slope seemed to be a part of her understanding. "Watch your step there," she said softly, pointing to a loose stone near a dry creek bed. "One wrong move and you could twist an ankle." He nodded, impressed, and adjusted his stride to match hers. It was clear that she was not only smart but also experienced in navigating the kind of rugged terrain that could easily trap someone unprepared. As they walked, she began to share fragments of her story. "My people have always had to be careful in these lands," she said, her voice steady but thoughtful. "We know how to survive. We know when to fight, when to run, and when to wait." Her eyes, dark and unwavering, met his as she spoke. There was a pride in her words, a deep respect for her heritage that the cowboy found both inspiring and humbling. He listened intently, aware that this was more than just a tale of hardship. It was a lesson in resilience, wisdom, and strength. He asked her gently, "Why did you let him tie you there? Couldn't you have escaped?" She paused, considering his question. "I could have," she admitted. "But sometimes you don't fight with strength alone. Sometimes you fight with patience, with intelligence, and with understanding. I wanted him to see that I wasn't afraid, even if he thought he had the upper hand." The cowboy nodded slowly, realizing that there was more to her than he had first understood. She was bold, yes, but she was also strategic, thoughtful, and wise beyond her years. The path they took led them past old wooden gates and through narrow corridors of brush that bordered the property. The cowboy kept a steady watch, scanning for any sign of movement or trouble. Occasionally, he glanced at her, noticing the way she moved with purpose and awareness. She wasn't just surviving, she was asserting her presence, her independence, and her capability. He found himself respecting her more with every step they took together. At one point, they came to a small, dry creek. Its bed was filled with rocks and the uneven surface made walking tricky. She stopped and turned to him. "You can step on the bigger stones," she advised. "They're stable. The smaller ones might shift under your weight." He followed her instructions, careful not to stumble. She moved with grace, her boots landing precisely where she intended. It was clear that she had spent much of her life learning to move through difficult terrain, and he admired her skill. It reminded him that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about knowledge, preparation, and respect for the land. As they continued, she shared more about her life. "I've faced challenges before," she said, her tone calm but firm. "I've had to stand up to people who thought they could control me. I've had to prove that my voice matters, that my presence matters." Being tied to that fence was a test, not just of me, but of him, of how he treats others. The cowboy listened, absorbing her words. He realized that this encounter was more than a simple rescue. It was a moment of learning, understanding, and reflection. She was teaching him in subtle ways about courage, dignity, and respect. They walked for what felt like hours, the sun dipping further toward the horizon, and the sky painted in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. The desert seemed alive in the fading light, every shadow shifting and changing as the colors deepened. They finally reached a small grove of mesquite and juniper trees, a place that offered some shelter and a chance to rest. The woman motioned for him to sit, and he lowered himself to the ground, grateful for a moment to catch his breath. As they rested, she produced a small piece of cloth and began to tend to a few minor scrapes she had noticed on his hands from the rough terrain. He tried to protest, but she waved him off with a firm smile. "You've been careful, but the land can still be unforgiving," she said. Her movements were precise and confident, and he felt a sense of comfort in her presence. There was no pity in her actions, only competence and care. Once his hands were cleaned and bandaged, he asked her more about the rancher who had tied her. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "He's a man who believes that power comes from fear," she said finally. "He thinks that controlling others is the way to prove strength, but strength isn't measured by how much fear you can create. It's measured by how much respect you can earn." The cowboy nodded slowly, realizing the truth in her words. He had seen many people try to assert power through intimidation, and he understood now that real strength was something very different. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the hills, and the first stars began to appear in the deepening sky. The air had cooled significantly, carrying the fresh scent of desert plants and the faint sound of distant wildlife. The cowboy and the woman continued their journey, moving with purpose but also with an emerging sense of mutual trust. They were no longer just two people navigating danger. They were allies, each recognizing the value and strength of the other. As night fell, they found a small clearing suitable for setting up a temporary shelter. The woman began gathering dry branches and brush, preparing a modest fire to provide warmth and light. The cowboy helped, stacking the wood carefully while keeping an eye on the surrounding area. It was a cooperative effort, each contributing their skills and knowledge to ensure safety and comfort. In this shared task, the cowboy noticed how capable she was, how resourceful and intelligent, and he felt a growing respect for her independence and resilience. Once the fire was lit, they sat together, watching the flames dance and listening to the quiet sounds of the desert at night. The woman spoke of her family, her community, and the traditions that shaped her life. She spoke with pride, but also with honesty about the challenges she faced and the injustices she had encountered. The cowboy listened, absorbing every word, realizing that he was learning not just about her, but about a way of life that demanded courage, respect, and intelligence. The night stretched on and the fire crackled softly. They shared a simple meal, exchanging stories and learning about each other. The woman's courage and determination impressed the cowboy deeply, and he found himself reflecting on his own life, his assumptions, and the ways he had judged others too quickly. She had challenged him, not with confrontation, but with her strength, wisdom, and unwavering presence. As the stars shone brightly overhead, the cowboy realized that their journey together was far from over. There were still challenges ahead: the rancher who had tied her, the dangers of the land, and the uncertainties of the future. But he felt a growing sense of confidence that they could face whatever came together. The woman had shown him the value of patience, intelligence, and courage, and he knew that he would carry these lessons with him long after this night was over. In the quiet of the desert, with only the fire and the stars for company, a bond began to form between them. It was not a bond of control or dependence, but of respect and understanding. They were two individuals, each strong in their own way, learning to navigate danger, uncertainty, and the vast, challenging world around them. And in that moment, both of them understood that this encounter, strange, unexpected, and tense, was the beginning of something far greater than either had anticipated. By the time the fire burned low and the night grew colder, they had found a rhythm in their companionship. The cowboy felt a quiet admiration for her strength, her intelligence, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She, in turn, recognized his reliability, his attentiveness, and his respect for her autonomy. Together, they had faced danger, uncertainty, and challenge, and had emerged with a deeper understanding of each other and themselves. As they prepared to rest for the night, the cowboy glanced at the vast desert around them. It was both beautiful and unforgiving, a place that demanded respect, patience, and skill. He realized that survival here was not about brute strength or force. It was about awareness, intelligence, and partnership. And as he watched the woman move with quiet confidence, preparing a small area for them to sleep safely, he understood that she embodied all of these qualities. The night passed with relative calm. The desert was alive with the soft sounds of nocturnal animals and the gentle rustle of the wind through sparse trees. The cowboy and the Apache woman took turns keeping watch, each learning from the other about vigilance, patience, and strategy. By dawn, they were ready to continue their journey, facing the challenges of the ranch and the broader world with renewed determination and trust. The sun rose slowly over the vast desert, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The cowboy and the Apache woman were already awake, their senses alert to the sounds of the morning. Birds chirped from the sparse trees, and the wind carried the faint scent of wild grasses and dry earth. The night had been calm, but the danger had not disappeared. They both knew that the rancher, or someone who had helped him, might still be looking for the woman. Yet, there was a quiet determination between them. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. As they moved through the open land, the cowboy noticed how naturally she seemed to navigate the terrain. Every step was calculated, every turn purposeful. "How do you know where to go?" he asked, curiosity and admiration in his voice. She glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "You learn by paying attention," she said simply. "The land speaks if you know how to listen. The rocks, the wind, the trees, they all tell you where to step and where to be careful. You just need to watch and understand." He nodded slowly, realizing that she had a depth of knowledge about the world that he had only glimpsed before. They crossed a dry riverbed, the stones underfoot shifting slightly as they walked. The woman led the way, pointing out the stable stones and warning him of loose ones. "Careful there," she said, her voice calm but firm. The ground is tricky. He followed her instructions, adjusting his steps carefully. He was beginning to understand that this journey was not just about reaching safety. It was about learning to trust, to observe, and to adapt. As the day grew warmer, she spoke more about her past. She had grown up learning to survive in a world that often underestimated her. "People think that because I'm a woman, I can't handle hardship," she said, shaking her head slightly. "They forget that my people have lived off this land for generations. We know how to endure. We know how to fight when necessary, and we know how to step back when the moment calls for patience." The cowboy listened intently, impressed by her wisdom and resilience. He realized that she was teaching him in subtle ways about courage and strategy, about strength that was quiet but unshakable. They paused for a brief rest near a cluster of desert shrubs. The woman pulled out a small flask of water and offered it to him. "Drink," she said. "The desert takes more from you than you realize." He took it gratefully, drinking slowly, and she drank after him. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the soft sounds of the desert, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the whisper of the wind. It was a calm moment, but both knew it could not last. The world they were moving through was unpredictable, and every calm moment was precious. After their short rest, they continued on, moving with renewed purpose. The woman had a plan, though she did not reveal all of it. She led the cowboy through less obvious paths, hidden among the rocks and brush, avoiding the main trails where the rancher or his men might pass. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew the land intimately, her steps sure and deliberate. The cowboy followed, grateful for her guidance and quietly admiring her courage. Along the way, they encountered small obstacles, a fallen tree here, a narrow canyon there. Each time, the woman took the lead, showing the cowboy how to navigate safely. At one point, they came to a steep incline, loose rocks threatening to tumble under their weight. She tested the ground first, moving carefully, and then helped him climb. "It's about balance and timing," she said. "You can't rush. You have to feel the land beneath you." He followed her advice, concentrating on each step, aware that one wrong move could lead to injury. As they moved, the conversation between them grew more personal. The cowboy shared stories of his life on the ranch, the long hours, the challenges of managing cattle, and the solitude of the desert. The woman listened, occasionally commenting or offering insight. She had a sharp mind and a keen sense of observation, and he found himself appreciating her perspective more and more. It was a conversation that built trust, a connection formed not by shared danger alone, but by mutual respect and understanding. The desert sun climbed higher, and the heat became more intense. They found a small shaded area beneath a rocky outcrop and took a longer break. She taught him how to find safe spots in the desert, how to read the signs of water or shade, and how to conserve energy. The cowboy realized that survival in this harsh land was not about strength alone. It was about knowledge, patience, and awareness. He felt a growing admiration for her skills, understanding that she had faced challenges far greater than he had ever imagined. As the afternoon approached, they resumed their journey, knowing that they could not linger in one place for long. They needed to reach a safer part of the ranch before nightfall. The woman's intuition guided them, her knowledge of the land allowing them to avoid potential dangers. Along the way, they spoke more about the rancher and the injustice of what had happened. She explained that he had tied her not just out of anger, but to assert control to test her resolve. "He thought fear would make me give in," she said, "but it didn't. It never does." The cowboy nodded, understanding the power of her words and the strength behind them. As they moved through a narrow passage between two rocky hills, they heard a distant shout. Instantly, they both froze, listening carefully. It was not close, but it was unmistakable, the voice of someone searching. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Stay low," she whispered. "We don't want to be seen." They crouched behind a boulder, watching as a figure moved along a distant trail. The cowboy felt his pulse quicken, but he trusted her instincts. She had led them this far with skill and confidence, and he knew that following her guidance was their best chance of staying safe. After a tense moment, the figure moved on, disappearing from view. The cowboy exhaled, relief washing over him. The woman gave him a small, approving nod. "See," she said quietly. "Patience and awareness keep you alive." He smiled faintly, realizing that this journey was teaching him more than just survival. It was teaching him about vigilance, trust, and the value of listening to someone who knows the land intimately. They continued their journey until they reached a small canyon with a trickle of water running through it. The woman knelt beside the water, washing some dust from her hands and face. The cowboy followed, taking a moment to refresh himself as well. They drank deeply, the cool water revitalizing them after the long trek. The canyon provided a natural barrier, a place where they could rest briefly without being easily seen. As they rested, the woman spoke more about her people and their traditions. She explained how her ancestors had lived off the land, how they had used knowledge, skill, and community to survive in harsh conditions. The cowboy listened, fascinated. He realized that her heritage was a source of strength, shaping her resilience and resourcefulness. He felt honored to learn from her, to witness the wisdom she carried so naturally. The afternoon wore on, and they began moving again, following the natural contours of the land. They climbed small hills, crossed dry washes, and navigated rocky terrain. Each step required focus, each decision mattered. The cowboy had learned to trust her completely, relying on her guidance and insight. She, in turn, seemed to respect his steady presence, his willingness to learn and follow her lead. It was a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, they reached a plateau overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking, golden light spilling over the desert, the distant hills painted in deep shadows, the sky ablaze with color. They paused, taking in the scene. The cowboy felt a sense of awe not just at the beauty of the land, but at the journey they had shared. He looked at her, noting the determination and courage in her eyes. She had faced danger, navigated uncertainty, and led them to safety, all with skill and intelligence. The woman turned to him and smiled faintly. "We're not out of danger yet," she said, her voice calm but serious. "But we've come far and we've done it together. That counts for something." He nodded, feeling a deep respect for her and a growing sense of camaraderie. He realized that this experience was changing him, teaching him lessons about courage, humility, and the value of true partnership. As night approached, they began descending toward a more sheltered area of the valley, where trees and brush provided cover. The woman led the way, moving with quiet confidence. The cowboy followed, alert and attentive. The journey had been long and challenging, but they had faced it together, learning from each other and growing stronger with every step. By the time they reached the shelter of the trees, the sky was dark, filled with stars that sparkled above the desert. They set up a small fire, gathering wood and arranging stones to contain the flames. The woman's skill was evident in every action. How she built the fire, how she positioned the stones, how she ensured safety and efficiency. The cowboy helped, impressed by her competence and resourcefulness. As they sat by the fire, the cowboy felt a sense of calm and accomplishment. They had faced danger, navigated the harsh desert, and learned to trust each other. The woman spoke quietly, reflecting on the day's journey and the challenges they had overcome. He listened, appreciating her perspective and the lessons she shared. It was a moment of understanding, connection, and mutual respect, a bond forged in the fire of shared experience and survival. The next morning, the desert woke slowly under a pale golden light. The cowboy and the Apache woman were already awake, their bodies sore from the long journey but their spirits strong. They had spent the night under the cover of trees, protected from the harsh winds and the watchful eyes of anyone who might be looking for them. The fire from the previous evening had long since burned down to glowing embers, and the morning air carried a crisp freshness that made them both feel renewed and ready to continue. The woman stood first, stretching carefully, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had a natural awareness, a sense of the land that the cowboy could only admire. Every movement was precise, every glance purposeful. She had always relied on her instincts and her knowledge of the desert, and today would be no different. The cowboy followed, gathering his few belongings and checking his horse, ready for whatever lay ahead. They knew that their journey was far from over. The rancher who had tied her the day before could still be nearby, and they had to be prepared for confrontation. "Stay close," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "We can't afford to be separated." The cowboy nodded, understanding her reasoning. He had come to trust her instincts completely, and he knew that she had a plan. Together, they moved across the desert, the sand crunching softly beneath their boots, the wind stirring the sparse grass around them. They traveled with caution, aware that the rancher could appear at any moment, but also with determination, knowing that they were capable of facing whatever challenges might come. As they moved, The woman shared more of her thoughts. "He thought he could control me with fear," she said, her voice steady. "He believed that tying me to that fence would make me submit, but that is not how strength works. True strength comes from respect, understanding, and patience. You can't force someone to obey if they are brave enough to stand firm." The cowboy listened, impressed by her clarity and confidence. Her words carried wisdom that went beyond the immediate danger. They spoke of life, of courage, and of dignity. By late morning, they reached a ridge that overlooked the ranch. From this vantage point, they could see the fields, the cattle, and the buildings below. It was clear that the rancher had begun searching for her, his men moving cautiously through the property. The woman crouched behind a large boulder, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. "We need a plan," she whispered. "We can't just rush in or wait to be seen. We have to be smart." The cowboy nodded, feeling a surge of respect for her leadership. He had spent years managing land, handling cattle, and facing unpredictable weather and wild animals, but he had rarely encountered someone as capable and strategic as she was. "What do you suggest?" he asked, ready to follow her lead. She considered for a moment, then outlined a plan. They would move quietly to the edge of the main yard, using cover from the brush and rocks, and approach the rancher's house from a side path he might not expect. Her goal was not confrontation for the sake of revenge, but to assert her rights and make the rancher understand that fear and control would not work on her. The cowboy followed her instructions, keeping low, moving carefully, and trusting her judgment completely. As they advanced, the rancher's men were distracted by a small herd of cattle moving near the far fence. It was the perfect opportunity. The woman led the way, silent and swift, her steps calculated. The cowboy followed, aware that every moment was critical. They reached a spot near the rancher's house, hidden by a low wall and a cluster of trees. From this position, they could see the rancher himself, pacing and frustrated, clearly unaware of their presence. The woman turned to the cowboy and spoke quietly. "We have a chance to resolve this without violence," she said. "We will show him that strength is not about fear. It is about fairness, intelligence, and courage. Are you ready?" The cowboy nodded, feeling both nervous and determined. He had learned much from her in the past days, the value of patience, observation, and respect. He knew that following her lead was the right choice. They stepped forward cautiously, the woman speaking first. "You tied me yesterday," she said, her voice clear and firm. "You thought it would scare me, control me, but it did not. I am not afraid, and I will not submit to fear. You must understand that respect is earned, not demanded." The rancher froze, surprised by her words and her boldness. He had expected fear, anger, or pleading, but none of that came. Instead, he was met with confidence, intelligence, and dignity. The cowboy stepped beside her, adding his voice. "She has been wronged," he said. "Your actions were unfair, and they could have caused real harm. But we are not here to fight. We are here to set things right." The rancher's expression shifted, a mix of surprise, irritation, and begrudging respect. He realized slowly that this was not a situation he could dominate with force. He had underestimated both the woman and the cowboy. The woman continued, calmly presenting her case. She spoke of fairness, honesty, and the importance of respect in dealing with others. Her words were measured, logical, and powerful. She explained how the incident had affected her and her community, and how it could have been avoided if the rancher had chosen understanding over control. The cowboy watched, amazed at her courage and skill. She was not only standing up for herself, but also teaching a lesson in integrity and wisdom. The rancher's men shifted uneasily, sensing the strength and confidence of the two standing before them. The atmosphere was tense, yet controlled. No one raised a hand, no one shouted, but the weight of the woman's words hung heavily in the air. The rancher finally spoke, his voice begrudging but honest. I didn't realize," he began, and then paused. The woman did not interrupt. She allowed him the space to reflect, to see the truth in what she had said. After a long moment, the rancher nodded slowly. "You are right," he admitted. "I misjudged you. I should not have tied you up. That was wrong." "I see that now." The woman accepted his words, not with triumph or anger, but with calm acknowledgement. "It is not about blame," she said. "It is about understanding. You must treat others with fairness if you expect respect." Her tone was firm but forgiving, demonstrating a strength that went beyond the immediate conflict. The cowboy felt a deep sense of respect for her. She had faced danger, injustice, and potential violence with courage and intelligence. She had resolved the situation not through force, but through strategy, patience, and dignity. He realized that he had learned as much from her as she had accomplished in asserting her rights. Together, they had turned a dangerous encounter into a lesson in respect and fairness. With the rancher's acknowledgement, the tension in the yard eased. The men relaxed, the rancher himself stepped back, and the immediate danger passed. The cowboy and the woman took a moment to breathe, feeling the weight of the experience and the relief that came with resolution. They had faced fear, challenge, and uncertainty, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected. As they left the rancher's property, the woman spoke quietly. "Strength is not measured by how much fear you can create," she said. "It is measured by how much respect you can earn, how wisely you use your skills, and how courageously you face challenges." The cowboy nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He knew that this encounter had changed him, teaching him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. They walked together across the desert, the sun rising higher, casting a warm glow over the landscape. The land that had once seemed harsh and unforgiving now felt alive, full of lessons and opportunities. Each step forward was a reminder of what they had faced and what they had learned. Their journey had been one of danger and tension, but also one of growth, understanding, and mutual respect. By midday, they reached a safe spot near a stream where they could rest and reflect. The woman knelt to drink from the cool water, her movements calm and purposeful. The cowboy followed, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent during the chaos of the previous days. They sat together, sharing the quiet comfort of survival and the satisfaction of having faced challenges with courage and intelligence. The woman looked at the cowboy, a small smile on her face. "We have come far," she said, "and we have done it together. That is something to remember." The cowboy nodded, feeling a deep respect and admiration for her. He realized that their journey had not only been about survival or confrontation. It had been about learning, growth, and the power of partnership. As the sun began to set, they prepared to rest, knowing that their lives would continue, shaped by the lessons of these days. The cowboy felt a sense of calm and clarity, understanding that true strength came not from control or fear, but from respect, patience, and courage. The woman had shown him this in every step, every word, and every action. In the quiet of the desert, as the stars began to appear overhead, they knew that their journey had reached a turning point. They had faced danger, injustice, and challenge, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected. The cowboy and the Apache woman had formed a bond built on trust, respect, and understanding, a bond that would shape their future in ways they could not yet imagine. The night stretched on, filled with the gentle sounds of the desert. The fire they had built flickered softly, casting warm light and shadows. The cowboy and the woman sat together, reflecting on their journey and the lessons learned. They had faced fear and danger, but they had done so with courage, intelligence, and dignity. And as the desert night enveloped them, they knew that they were ready to face whatever came next together, as equals, as partners, and as friends.